March 15th, 2024, the Western Pacific Ocean. If you look out the porthole of a ship here, the water is a brilliant, endless blue, but beneath the hull lies a scar in the Earth's crust that plunges into perpetual darkness. This is the Mariana Trench. At its deepest point, known as Challenger Deep, the ocean floor sits nearly 11 kilometers down. It is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. For decades, we thought this place was a desert, a lifeless void of freezing water and crushing pressure. But we were wrong. Something has been discovered in the abyss. Something that isn't just surviving the pressure, but using the darkness as a weapon. Before we descend into the most hostile environment on Earth, I want to know where you are watching this nightmare from. Are you safe on dry land in London, São Paulo, or New York? Tell me your city or country in the comments below, and be honest. Would you have the courage to step inside a small titanium sphere and dive 11 kilometers down, knowing that if the glass cracks, the water would incinerate you faster than your brain could process the pain? Let me know if you would take the risk. Today, a new mission is descending to answer that question. The vessel is the Triton-X, a prototype submersible built around a solid titanium sphere with a single 20-centimeter thick acrylic viewport. Inside are two souls, Pilot Commander Elena Vance, a veteran of deep-sea salvage, and Dr. Thorne, a lead biologist. They are not looking for bacteria or giant viruses. They are investigating a series of anomalous biological sounds recorded by deep-sea hydrophones 3 weeks ago. Sounds that were too rhythmic to be tectonic plates shifting. Sounds that mimicked the mechanical hum of our own machines. The descent takes 4 hours. It is a slow, terrifying fall into the abyss. As they pass 3,000 meters, the sunlight vanishes completely. They enter the midnight zone. Outside the acrylic glass, there is nothing but absolute blackness and marine snow. Dead organic matter drifting down like dust in an abandoned house. But the real enemy here isn't the dark, it is the pressure. At the bottom of Challenger Deep, the water exerts a pressure of 8 tons per square inch. To visualize this, imagine an elephant standing on your thumb. As the Triton-X passes 8,000 meters, the atmosphere inside the sphere changes. The titanium hull begins to contract under the cold and pressure. It makes sounds, loud, metallic bangs, and groans that echo through the cabin like gunshots. It is the sound of the submarine, fighting to stay round. Vance checks the systems. Everything is green. The external floodlights cut a cone of white light through the endless night, revealing nothing but the empty void. Then, at 10,000 meters, just 1 kilometer from the bottom, the sonar screen flickers. A ping, then another. Something large has detached itself from the trench wall and is rising to meet them. It isn't drifting with the current. It is intercepting. Dr. Thorne stares at the screen, confused. The object is matching their descent speed perfectly. It is circling them. Suddenly, the external floodlights on the starboard side flicker. Not all of them, just one bank. Then, a sound vibrates through the hull. Crack. It wasn't a hull pop. It was the sound of physical impact. The starboard lights go dead, plunging half the view into darkness. Vance checks the diagnostics, her face turning pale. The bulbs didn't burn out. She whispers, "They were smashed." They are now in the Hadal zone, the deepest layer of the ocean. They are blind on one side, and the sonar shows the target is no longer circling. It is clinging to the hull. The mission has changed. They are no longer the explorers. They are the bait. The digital depth gauge on the main console of the Triton-X read 6,000 meters. Commander Elena Vance watched the numbers tick upward with a practiced, stoic calm, though her grip on the joystick betrayed a subtle tension. Beside her, Dr. Aris Thorne was less composed. He wiped a layer of condensation from the small, thick acrylic viewport and peered out into the void. There was nothing to see. Beyond the cone of their high-intensity LED floodlights, the Pacific Ocean was a wall of absolute, crushing blackness. They were sinking through the abyssal zone, a place where the water temperature hovers just above freezing, and the pressure is enough to turn a standard military submarine into a crumpled soda can. Inside the titanium sphere, the air was cold and recycled, carrying the faint metallic taste of ozone. The silence of the descent was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the oxygen scrubbers and the occasional terrifying groan of the metal hull. It is a sound that every deep-sea pilot knows but never truly gets used to. It is the sound of the molecular structure of the titanium contracting, squeezing tighter as the weight of the ocean presses in from all sides. At this depth, 6 kilometers down, there is no margin for error. A catastrophic failure wouldn't result in a leak. It would result in instant atomized obliteration. The human brain cannot even process the speed at which death would arrive. Thorne adjusted his headset, pressing the cups tight against his ears. The hydrophone array, the submarine's sensitive electronic ears, was picking up the ambient noise of the trench. Usually this deep, the ocean is silent, a grave for the world above. But today the graph on his screen was jumping with irregular, jagged spikes. "I'm picking up low-frequency clicks," Thorne murmured, his eyes glued to the data stream. "It's too irregular for geological shifting or tectonic grinding. It sounds biological, but the volume is wrong. It's too loud, too resonant for anything that should exist in the abyss." Vance checked the forward sonar. The screen swept green, painting a topographical map of the trench walls closing in around them as they descended towards the V-shaped bottom of Challenger Deep. "We have a contact," she announced, her voice tight and professional. "Bearing 330, range 400 meters. It's matching our descent vector." Thorne leaned over the console, squinting at the radar. "Is it drifting debris?" Marine snow clung together. "No," Vance replied, tapping the screen to highlight the anomaly. "Debris doesn't change course. Look, it stopped. It's hovering. It's waiting for us." The object on the sonar was a ghost. It appeared as a large, amorphous blob, lacking the solid density of a rock or a whale carcass. It hovered at the edge of their sensor range, just outside the reach of the external floodlights. It was watching. And as the Triton-X continued its slow, heavy fall towards the bottom, the object shadowed them, keeping a precise, calculated distance. At 7,000 meters, the atmosphere inside the sphere shifted from clinical observation to palpable dread. The hull groaned loudly, a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. Thorne jumped, hitting his knee against the console. Vance didn't flinch, but her eyes darted to the hull integrity sensors. All green. The sphere was holding, but the ocean outside was getting more aggressive. Then the first incident occurred. It didn't happen with a roar or a crash, but with a sudden, violent loss of sensory input. The entire starboard side of the viewports went black. The bank of high-powered external LEDs that illuminated the right side of the submarine simply vanished. 1 second, there was light revealing the particulate matter in the water. The next, there was a void. Vance reacted instantly, her hands flying across the breaker panel. "We lost the starboard array. Check the circuit breakers. Did we surge? Did we blow a fuse?" Thorne unbuckled and checked the rear diagnostics panel. His face went pale in the red emergency light. "The breakers didn't trip, Elena. The circuit is open. That means the bulbs aren't just off. They're gone. The housing has been breached." Vance stared at him, the implications sinking in. "Those housings are rated for 20,000 psi. They are armored glass. They don't just breach on their own, unless something hit them," Thorne whispered, looking at the blacked-out window. They were now descending in a half-blind state. The left side of the submarine was bathed in white light, revealing the falling particles of marine snow like stars in space. The right side was an abyssal void, a dark curtain, hiding whatever had just destroyed their equipment. And in that darkness, the sonar contact began to move closer. It wasn't drifting anymore. It was closing the distance with terrifying speed. Vance slowed the descent thrusters. "I'm bringing us to a hover. We need to assess the damage before we go deep. If the hull integrity is compromised, we need to abort immediately." Clang. The sound rang through the titanium sphere like a church bell. It came from directly above the hatch. It was a sharp, distinct impact, not the dull thud of a soft body or the scrape of current, but the hard metallic strike of something solid hitting the titanium. Thorne looked up at the hatch wheel, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What was that?" "It sounded like rock," Vance said, drawing her service pistol from the survival kit, a useless gesture in a submarine, but an instinctive one against an intruder. Maybe a rock fell from the trench wall. A landslide. Clang, clang, clang. 3 more hits, rhythmic, deliberate, spaced exactly 1 second apart. "That's not a rock," Thorne said, his voice trembling. "Rocks don't have rhythm. Rocks don't knock. Something is outside the hull. It's testing the metal." Vance grabbed the control stick for the external robotic arm. She spun the external camera around, pointing it upwards towards the hatch. The camera feed flickered on the main screen, grainy and distorted by the interference of the depth. At first, they saw nothing but the black water and the smooth curve of the submarine's top dome. Then a shape moved across the lens. It was translucent, ghostly white, and massive. A tentacle, but not like any tentacle Thorne had ever seen in his textbooks. It was thick as a tree trunk at the base, tapering to a fine whip-like tip. It lacked the suction cups of a shallow water octopus. Instead, it was lined with hooked, keratinous claws that glinted in the camera light. It glided over the camera housing, caressing the lens with a terrifying gentleness. "My God," Thorne whispered, pressing his hand against the screen. "Look at the size of it. That's not possible. The gigantism scale doesn't go that high. That limb alone must be 15 feet long." The tentacle wrapped around the camera mount. On the screen, they watched as the limb tightened. The metal of the camera housing groaned audibly through the hull. The creature wasn't attacking blindly. It was dismantling. Then the feed cut to static. "It blinded the camera," Vance said, her military training kicking in, overriding the fear. "It took out the lights. Now it took out the camera. It's blinding us systematically. It knows exactly where the sensors are." She reached for the ballast controls, her decision made. "Abort. We are aborting the dive. Dropping weights. We need to surface now." She pulled the emergency release handle for the iron ballast weight. "These massive steel plates are attached to the bottom of the sub by electromagnets. When released, the sub becomes positively buoyant and rockets back to the surface." A mechanical thunk should have echoed through the ship as the weights dropped away. Silence. The Triton-X did not lurch upward. It continued to sink, heavy and slow. Vance pulled it again, harder. She punched the manual override. Nothing happened. The digital readout showed the weights were still attached. "The weights didn't drop," Vance said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The release mechanism is Thorne looked at the sonar. The red blob was now directly underneath them. It wasn't just observing anymore. It was catching them. "It didn't jam," Thorne said, looking at the black viewport, realizing the horror of their situation. "It's holding them. It's underneath us. It's holding the weights against the hull. It knows that if we drop the weights, we leave. It wants us to stay." They were passing 9,000 meters now. They were blind, heavy, and being escorted down to the bottom of the world by a creature that had just dismantled their escape systems with the precision of an engineer. The knock on the door hadn't been a greeting. It was an interrogation. The submarine continued to fall. 10,000 meters. The pressure gauge was in the red zone. The hull groaned continuously now, a symphony of stress. Vance tried the thrusters, hoping to power their way up, but the engines whined and sputtered. Something was fouling the propellers. "We have no propulsion," Vance reported. "We are dead in the water. Gravity is taking us down. Look." Thorne pointed to the remaining viewport on the port side. In the faint glow of the remaining light, they saw the silt of the bottom approaching. The Challenger Deep, the most desolate place on Earth. They were about to touch down.
But the silt wasn't it was disturbed. There were drag marks, mounds of debris, and in the center of the lights, waiting for them, was a collection of shapes that shouldn't be there. Twisted metal, shattered acrylic, the remains of a Chinese lander that had gone missing 2 years ago. The Triton-X hit the bottom with a soft thud, kicking up a cloud of white sediment. They were 11 kilometers down. They were trapped, and outside, in the eternal night, the Hadal Phantom released the weights. Its job done, it had delivered its prey to the dinner table. Now the real work would begin. The creature didn't want the submarine, it wanted what was inside. And then the knocking started again, louder this time, not on the hatch, but on the window. Tap, tap. The cloud of white sediment kicked up by the crash landing of the Triton-X took nearly 20 minutes to settle. For those 20 minutes, Commander Elena Vance and Dr. Eris Thorne sat in a silence so profound it felt heavy, as if the silence itself possessed mass. They were parked on the bottom of the Challenger deep, 10,994 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The pressure outside the hull was 8 tons per square inch. To put that in perspective, it is the equivalent of having a fully loaded school bus balanced on every single inch of the submarine surface. The titanium sphere, the pinnacle of human engineering, was groaning under the strain. It was a constant, low-frequency protest, a reminder that we're trespassing in a realm where physics dictated their immediate destruction. Inside the sphere, the temperature had plummeted. The ocean outside was just above freezing, and the cold seeped through the metal walls, bypassing the insulation. Vance's breath was now visible in the red emergency lighting. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. She kept her hand near the ballast release lever, even though she knew it was jammed. It was a reflex, a phantom limb of control in a situation where they had none. "Sonar is dead," Vance whispered, her voice sounding too loud in the confined space. Whatever grabbed her, it ripped the transducer right off the hull. "We're deaf." Thorne didn't answer immediately. He was staring out of the single remaining viewport on the port side. The sediment was finally clearing, revealing the landscape of the trench floor. It was a moonscape of grey ooze, undulating dunes of diatomaceous earth that had remained undisturbed for millions of years. But it wasn't empty. "Elena," Thorne said, his voice trembling with a mixture of scientific awe and primal terror, "turn on the port floodlights, low intensity." "I don't want to startle it." Vance flicked the switch. The remaining bank of LEDs flickered to life, casting a stark white beam into the eternal night. What the light revealed was a graveyard. Lying in the silt, less than 30 meters away, was the wreckage of the Chinese autonomous lander, Hadal, which had gone silent 2 years prior. The official report stated that the lander had likely imploded due to a structural defect. But as the light of the Triton-X washed over the debris, a different story emerged. The lander hadn't imploded. The pressure sphere was intact, but the robotic arms, the thrusters, and the battery packs had been surgically removed. They were scattered around the main hull in a neat, almost ritualistic circle. Cables dangled from the sockets, frayed and stripped. It looked like a dissection. "It wasn't a crush event," Thorne murmured, pressing his face against the cold acrylic glass. "Something took it apart. Something wanted to see how it worked." Then movement. It didn't come from the wreckage. It came from the darkness above it. At first it looked like a distortion in the water, a heat haze shimmering in the cold. But then the creature moved into the beam of light, and the distortion resolved into a nightmare. It was an octopus, but to call it an octopus would be like calling a wolf a poodle. It belonged to the order Octopoda, but it was a species that defied every known classification of gigantism. It was translucent. Its skin lacked pigment, a ghostly, gelatinous white that allowed the internal organs to be faintly visible pulsing inside the mantle. A massive, 3-chambered heart beat slowly, pumping blue copper-rich blood through its body. But it was the size that stopped Thorne's heart. The creature's mantle was the size of a small car. Its tentacles, 8 of them, trailed off into the darkness, thick at the base, and lined not just with suckers, but with hardened, keratinous hooks, evolutionary adaptations for gripping the slippery rock walls of the trench. Based on the scale of the debris next to it, Thorne estimated the creature's wingspan to be at least 12 meters, 36 feet, a leviathan that shouldn't exist. "It's the Gaunteus," Thorne whispered, referencing a cryptid that biologists had dismissed as myth. "It's real." And it's looking at us. The creature didn't flee from the light. In the deep ocean, most animals are blind or photophobic. This one was neither. It possessed two enormous eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, devoid of pupils, glowing with a faint, bioluminescent gold. It hovered over the Chinese wreckage, its arms undulating gently in the current, staring directly into the viewport of the Triton-X. Then the mimicking began. A sound resonated through the hull of the submarine. Whir clunk, whir clunk. That's the ballast pump, she said, checking the panel. But the pump is off. Why am I hearing the pump? Thorn listened closely. It's not the pump, Elena. It's coming from outside. The creature's mantle pulsed. It was a perfect audio reproduction of the mechanical sound the Triton-X had made during its descent. It's mimicking us, Thorn realized, horror dawning on him. It has a syrinx, or some kind of resonating chamber. It heard our machines and now it's repeating the sound back to us. It's trying to communicate, or it's mocking us. The octopus slowly drifted closer. It moved with a terrifying grace. Liquid and silent, it reached out with one of its massive tentacles. The limb extended, unfurling like a whip, and gently touched the acrylic glass of the viewport. The suction cups were massive, pulsating discs of muscle. The hooks scraped against the window, creating a screeching sound that set Vance's teeth on edge. The creature wasn't attacking, it was exploring. It ran its tentacle along the rim of the viewport, feeling the seam where the acrylic met the titanium. It was looking for a weakness. It was tactilely analyzing the intruder. It's investigating the seal, Vance noted, her hand tightening on the grip of her pistol. It knows that the window is different from the hull. Don't shoot, Thorn warned, though he knew the bullet couldn't penetrate the glass anyway. If you crack the glass from the inside, the pressure will finish the job instantly. The octopus retracted its tentacle and hovered just inches from the glass. Its giant golden eye filled the entire window. Thorn found himself staring into an intelligence that felt ancient and alien. This wasn't the instinctual gaze of a shark. There was curiosity there, calculation. The creature tilted its head, observing the two humans inside the sphere like specimens in a jar. Then the creature did something that defied belief. It changed color. Usually, deep-sea creatures don't change color because there is no light to see. But this octopus flared a sudden brilliant pattern of bioluminescent ripples across its skin, flashing from white to deep red to a pulsating blue. It's scolding us, Thorn interpreted. In cephalopod behavior, rapid color changes are often a display of dominance or aggression. It's telling us that this is its territory, and we are trespassing. Vance checked the oxygen scrubbers. We have 72 hours of air, Aris, but if that thing decides to get physical, we won't last 72 minutes. Look at what it did to the Chinese land. It tore titanium alloy like it was paper. As if hearing her, the octopus turned its attention away from the window and towards the top of the submarine. It drifted up, out of sight of the viewport. Where is it going? Vance asked, looking up at the... It's going for the comms array, Thorn guessed. It disabled the sonar first. It knows the sensors are important. A moment later, a horrific screech of tearing metal echoed through the sphere. It sounded like a car crash happening in slow motion on the roof of the sub. We lost the high-gain antenna, Vance reported, watching the icons on her screen turn red one by one, and the external temperature gauge. It's stripping the hull. It's blinding us completely. The creature wasn't just a brute. It was a saboteur. It understood that the metal appendages on the outside of the sphere were the submarine's sensory organs. By removing them, it was reducing the Triton-X to a blind deaf stone at the bottom of the ocean. Thorn frantically typed notes into his log, his hands shaking. Subject displays high-level problem-solving capabilities, tool use, acoustic mimicry, systematic dismantling of potential threats. This is not an animal. This is a rival intelligence. The noises on the roof stopped. The creature drifted back down into view. It was holding something in its tentacles. It was the high-gain antenna, a solid bar of titanium and ceramic. The octopus held it up to the window, as if showing off its trophy. Then, with a casual display of strength that was terrifying to witness, it snapped the titanium bar in half. It discarded the pieces in the silt. It wants us to know, Vance whispered. It wants us to know that it can get in whenever it wants. The creature then settled onto the sediment in front of the sub. It gathered its legs under itself, wrapping them around a large, jagged volcanic rock, a piece of basalt the size of a watermelon. It held the rock securely in 2 tentacles. "What is it doing?" Vance asked. "Octopuses use tools," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They use coconut shells for shelter. They use stones to block their dens. But this," the octopus raised the rock. It swam forward, propelling itself towards the viewport. "Brace yourself," Vance screamed. Bam! The creature slammed the rock against the center of the acrylic window. The sound was thunderous inside the sphere. The entire submarine shook. Vance and Thorne were thrown back against their seats. They looked at the window. The acrylic held. It was 20 centimeters thick, designed to withstand the weight of the ocean, but the impact had left a mark, a tiny, white scratch on the surface. The octopus drifted back, seemingly inspecting its work. It looked at the scratch, then it looked at the rock. It adjusted its grip. It's testing the tensile strength, Thorne realized. It knows it can't squeeze through the titanium. It's found the weak point. It's going to chip away at the glass. "If it cracks the glass," Vance said, unbuckling her seatbelt and scrambling for the emergency patch kit, a useless gesture. "Against 11,000 meters of water pressure, we implode. The water enters at supersonic speed. It cuts us in half and burns us alive." The octopus raised the rock again. It didn't rush. It was methodical. It was working like a miner. Bam! The second hit was harder. The scratch deepened. A spiderweb of microscopic fractures began to appear around the impact point. "We need to move," Vance yelled. "I'm going to try to pulse the thrusters. Maybe the noise will scare it." She slammed the thruster controls forward. The engines whined, trying to spin in the thick mud. A cloud of silt erupted around them. The submarine lurched forward a few inches, dragging its belly on the ocean floor. The octopus didn't flee. It simply grabbed the front skid of the submarine with 4 of its tentacles and held fast. The thrusters screamed, cavitation bubbles forming and collapsing, but the sub didn't move. The creature was anchoring them. It was stronger than the engines. It released the skid and returned to the window. It held the rock up again. This wasn't a predation event. Predation is fast. Predation is about hunger. This was a siege. This was an execution. The creature had analyzed the intruder, disassembled its defenses, trapped it in the mud, and identified the single point of failure. Bam! The third hit echoed through the Challenger deep. Inside the sphere, the air felt thin. The silence between the strikes was the loudest sound Thorne had ever heard. He looked at the creature's eye. There was no anger there, just a cold, golden curiosity. It wanted to see what was inside the shell. It wanted to crack the... "It's not stopping, Elena," Thorne said, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. "It's going to keep hitting until the physics give way." Vance looked at the depth gauge. 10,994 meters. They were the deepest humans in history, and they were about to become the deepest. "We have one option," Vance said, her eyes fixed on the robotic arm controls. "The manipulator arm. It still has power. It's hydraulic. If I can grab it, if I can hurt it. It's a soft-bodied invertebrate," Thorne said, "but it's huge, and if you miss, you might hit the window yourself." "I won't miss, Vance." She powered up the arm. Outside, a mechanical claw unfolded from the side of the sub. It was clumsy, slow, designed for picking up rock samples, not hand-to-hand combat with a leviathan. The octopus saw the arm move. It paused. The rock still held high. It watched the mechanical claw extend. It seemed amused. As Vance maneuvered the claw towards the creature's mantle, the octopus reacted with blinding speed. It didn't drop the rock. It used another tentacle to catch the robotic arm mid-swing. It wrapped around the hydraulic piston and the pressure alarms inside the sub blared. "Hydraulic failure." The computer voice droned. The octopus ripped the robotic arm out of its socket. Hydraulic fluid, green and fluorescent, spewed into the black water like alien blood. The creature tossed the severed arm onto the pile of debris next to the Chinese lander. It turned back to the window. It raised the rock for the 4th time. The mimic had disarmed them completely. It had mimicked their sounds, stripped their sensors, anchored their engines, and dismembered their defenses. Now there was nothing left but the glass. Bam! A distinct, sharp crack sound resonated through the cabin. Thorne looked at the window. In the dead center, right where the rock had impacted, a visible fracture had appeared. It was small, maybe 2 inches long, but at this depth, a fracture is a cancer. It would grow. The pressure was already working on it, prying the molecules apart. It cracked it. Thorn whispered. Elena. It cracked the glass. The octopus dropped the rock. It drifted closer, pressing its eye against the acrylic. It seemed to be inspecting the crack, verifying the success of its labor. Then it pulsed a deep, satisfied red color. It didn't pick up the rock again. It didn't need to. It knew that time and physics would do the rest. It wrapped its tentacles around the sphere, embracing the submarine in a deadly hug. It settled inside. The crew of the Triton-X listened to the sound of the hull contracting and the terrifying high-pitched hiss of water molecules forcing their way through the fracture. The countdown had begun.
The sound of death at 11,000 meters is not a scream. It is a hiss, a high-pitched, sibilant whistle, like a tea kettle beginning to boil in the next rim. It was the sound of seawater being forced through the microscopic fracture in the center of the acrylic viewport. Inside the Triton-X, Commander Elena Vance and Dr. Eris Thorne sat frozen, their eyes locked on the spiderweb of white lines etching itself deeper into the glass. The air in the cabin was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and the sharp metallic tang of fear. They weren't just trapped, they were being slowly crushed. Outside, the Giganteus had settled in for the kill. It had wrapped its mantle around the top of the sphere, draping its massive, translucent tentacles over the viewports like a shroud. The suction cups, each the size of a dinner plate, pulsed rhythmically against the hull. The creature wasn't attacking anymore. It didn't need to. It had done the work. It had broken the seal. Now it was simply waiting for physics to finish the job. It knew that the bubble would burst, and when it did, the soft meat inside would be available. Thorne stared at the underside of the creature's tentacle, pressed against the glass. He could see the internal fluids moving, the twitching of the nerve bundles. "It's patient," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It understands the concept of structural failure. That's terrifyingly abstract thinking for an invertebrate." "How long?" Vance asked, her eyes darting to the pressure gauge. The hull integrity warning light was blinking a steady, rhythmic red. "The crack is propagating," Thorne said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "At this pressure, 10 minutes, maybe 15. Once the fracture hits the edge of the frame, the whole window blows in. We won't even feel it, Elena. We'll be vaporized." Vance looked at the console. The controls were dead. The robotic arm was gone. The thrusters were fouled or held fast by the beast. The ballast weights were mechanically jammed by the creature's grip. They were anchored to the bottom of the world. "We can't just wait to die," Vance snapped, unbuckling her harness. She moved to the rear of the sphere, ripping open the maintenance panel. "Think, Eris. We have no weapons. We have no propulsion. What do we have?" Thorne looked around the cramped sphere. "We have samples. We have cameras. We have," he trailed off. "We have power. The main battery banks." "Exactly," Vance said, pulling a bundle of thick, insulated cables from the wall. "We are sitting in a titanium ball powered by high-density lithium-ion batteries. We are floating in salt water which is highly conductive, and that thing is wrapped around us wet and naked." Thorne realized what she was suggesting. "You want to electrify the hull? I want to turn this submarine into the world's biggest taser," Vance replied, stripping the insulation off a heavy copper wire with her teeth. "If I can bypass the safety breakers and route the main bus directly to the hull grounding, we can dump the entire remaining charge of the battery into the skin of the ship." "Elena, that's suicide," Thorne argued, though he moved to help her. "If you short the main bus, you'll fry the life support. You'll fry the comms. We'll be sitting in the dark with no air." "We're already dead in 10 minutes, she countered, pointing at the hissing window. "I'd rather die in the dark fighting than sit here and wait for that squid to crack us open like a walnut." The plan was desperate, reckless, and scientifically sound. Cephalopods, octopuses, and squids have highly sensitive nervous systems. Their skin is covered in sensors. They react violently to electrical stimuli. A massive discharge might not kill a creature that size, but it would hurt. It would cause a muscle spasm massive enough to break its grip. "Help me find the external leads," Vance ordered. The creature ripped off the external lights and the comms array. "That means there are exposed wires on the outside of the hull. If we energize the hull, the current will flow through those broken wires into the water, and into him." They worked with the frantic energy of the condenser. The hiss from the window was getting louder. The crack had grown another inch. The creature outside seemed to sense the frantic activity inside. It shifted its grip. The beak, a massive, black parrot-like maw, hidden in the center of the tentacles, scraped against the top of the titanium sphere. Grounch. It was trying to bite the metal. "He's getting impatient," Thorne said, his hands trembling as he rewired the breaker box. "He senses the magnetic field changing. Sharks and rays can detect electricity. Maybe this thing can too." "Then let's give him a shock he won't forget," Vance said. She connected the final cable. "I need to shut down everything else. Life support, scrubbers, internal lights. We need every amp." "Do it," Thorne said. Vance flipped the master switches. The submarine died. The hum of the air scrubbers ceased. The red emergency lights vanished. They were plunged into absolute darkness, illuminated only by the faint, eerie bioluminescence of the creature outside. Through the viewport, the golden glow of the octopus's eye was visible, pressing against the cracking glass. It looked curious. It pulsed a soft blue light. "It knows," Thorne whispered in the dark. "It's tightening." The hull groaned loudly. The creature was squeezing. The crack in the window hissed violently. A spray of atomized salt water misting into the cabin. "Ready," Vance said, her hand on the heavy throw switch she had rigged. "On 3, brace yourself. This is going to get loud." 1. The octopus shifted. Its beak scraped the hatch again. 2. Thorne closed his eyes. 3. Vance threw the switch. For a microsecond nothing happened. Then the laws of physics took over. The stored energy of the massive lithium banks was dumped instantly into the titanium shell of the Triton-X. The effect was cataclysmic. Inside the sphere, the air filled with the smell of ozone and burning plastic. Static electricity made their hair stand on end. But outside was chaos. The seawater around the hull instantly electrolyzed, exploding into millions of tiny bubbles of hydrogen and oxygen. The water glowed with a corona of blue discharge. And the Gianteus screamed. It wasn't a vocal scream. Octopuses have no vocal cords. It was a physical scream. Every muscle in the creature's massive body contracted at once. The bioluminescence in its skin flared to a blinding strobe light white, illuminating the ocean floor for miles. The tentacles, which had been wrapped lovingly around the sub, went rigid. They whipped away from the metal as if the shockwave of the creature's spasms slammed against the sub, knocking Vance and Thorne out of their seats. The submarine rocked violently in the silt. Through the viewport, they saw the monster thrash. It was a whirlwind of limbs and it inked a massive cloud of thick, viscous black fluid that was instantly dispersed by the violent thrashing. The creature propelled itself backward, crashing into the trench wall. Stunned and confused, it let go. Thorne yelled in the dark. "It let go. Check the way." Vance scrambled back to the panel, turning the emergency power back on. The red lights flickered to life. "We need to drop the ballast while it's stunned." She grabbed the manual release lever before the creature's tentacles had physically jammed the mechanism, holding the iron weights against the hull. Now the hull was clear. She pulled the lever. Clunk thud. The sound was beautiful. The heavy iron plates fell away from the bottom of the sub, sinking into the mud. The Triton-X, suddenly 2,000 pounds lighter, lurched. It broke the suction of the mud. It began to rise. "We're moving," Vance shouted, watching the depth gauge. "Ascent rate, 2 meters per second. We're flying." They were rocketing upwards, leaving the bottom of the world behind. Thorne looked out the viewport. The cloud of ink and silt obscured the view.
But for a split second, he saw the creature recovering. The Gianteus wasn't dead, it was furious. As the sub rose past the Chinese wreckage, the creature launched itself from the trench wall. It moved with terrifying speed, a jet of water propelling it upward. It chased them. It's following. Thorne screamed. It's coming after us. We're ascending too fast, Vance said. It can't match our buoyancy lift. But the creature didn't need to match their speed. It just needed one last hit. As the sub accelerated past 10,000 meters, the octopus lashed out with its longest tentacle. The limb, thick as a telephone pole, whipped through the water and struck the bottom of the submarine. Boom. The impact spun the Triton-X like a top. Inside, Vance and Thorne were thrown against the walls. The submarine shuddered. Damage report. Vance yelled, fighting the vertigo. Thorne looked at the window. The crack. The impact had shocked the hull. The fracture in the center of the viewport sparked. It grew. Crack. It extended to the very edge of the titanium frame. The window. Thorne yelled, it's going to blow. They were at 9,000 meters. Still deep enough to be crushed instant. The water jetting through the crack was no longer a mist. It was a spray, cutting across the cabin like a pressure washer. The bottom of the sphere began to fill with water. We need to slow down, Vance said, her hand hovering over the thrusters. The turbulence is stressing the glass. If we slow down, it catches us, Thorne said, looking down into the dark. Keep going. Redline it. They shot upwards through the darkness. 8,000 meters. 7,000. The creature fell behind, unable to tolerate the rapid pressure change, or perhaps wary of the electric sting. It faded into the black, a glowing ghost returning to its kingdom. But the danger was now inside with them. The glass was groaning. The water level was rising around their ankles. Come on, Vance whispered to the machine. Hold together, just a little longer. 6,000 meters, 5,000. The pressure was decreasing, but the structural integrity of the window was compromised. It was a race between the depth gauge and the fracture line. At 4,000 meters, the internal electronics began to spark. The salt water was shorting out the console. The red emergency lights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness again. Eris, Vance called out in the black. I'm here, Thorne replied, his voice calm, resigned. I'm holding the patch kit against the leak. It's not working. They sat in the dark, ascending through the water column, listening to the sound of the ocean trying to get in. They were the first humans to make contact with a dominant intelligence in the abyss. They had survived the trap. They had survived the but as the glass ticked and popped in the dark, they realized that the ocean doesn't let its secrets go easily. The ascent from the bottom of the world is usually a time of relief. It is the victory lap after a successful dive. But for the crew of the Triton-X, the journey upward was an agonizing, slow-motion execution. They were rocketing towards the surface at 3 meters per second, a vertical velocity that strained the damaged stabilizers. But it wasn't fast enough. Inside the titanium sphere, the atmosphere was no longer that of a scientific vessel. It was that of a sinking ship. The air was freezing, filled with the mist of atomized seawater spraying through the fracture in the viewport. The water level on the deck plates was rising, sloshing around their ankles, numbing their feet with a cold that felt like liquid nitrogen. Commander Elena Vance sat in the pilot's couch, her hands gripping the manual ascent controls so hard, her knuckles were white. She was flying blind. The external cameras were gone, ripped away by the Giganteus. The sonar was dead. The navigation computer was flickering, shorting out, intermittently, as the humidity inside the cabin reached 100%. She had to rely on the analog depth gauge, a simple needle spinning counterclockwise, and her own equilibrium to keep the sub stable. 4,000 meters. Vance called out, her voice ragged. We are passing the Titanic's depth. Pressure is still 400 atmospheres. Eris Thorne didn't answer. He was crouched by the window, holding a thick rubber sealant pad against the center of the acrylic. It was a futile gesture. The pressure of the ocean was pushing against the pad with the force of a freight train. The water hissed around the edges of the rubber, cutting his fingers like razor blades. But he held it. It was the only thing he could do. The crack is moving, Thorn whispered, staring into the crystalline structure of the window. The viewport of the Triton-X was not a single piece of glass. It was a conical laminate, constructed of 3 separate layers of industrial-grade acrylic bonded together. The rock strikes from the Octopus had shattered the outer layer. The final blow from the tentacle had compromised the middle layer. Now only the inner pane, a slab of plastic less than 3 inches thick, stood between them and the crushing weight of the ocean. As they ascended, the physics of the fracture changed. At the bottom, the immense pressure actually helped hold the window together, compressing the crack. But as they rose, the pressure decreased. The acrylic began to expand. This relaxation caused the shards of the outer layers to shift and grind against each other. Crack, pop, scree. The sounds were horrific. It sounded like ice breaking on a frozen lake, amplified 1,000 times. Every pop signaled a new failure in the chemical bonds of the window. 3,000 meters, Vance announced. Entering the bathypelagic zone, we should be seeing bioluminescence outside if we had lights. Suddenly a spark showered down from the overhead console. Then another. The rising water in the cabin had reached the lower junction box for the life support systems. The main computer screen flashed blue, then died. The red emergency lights flickered, buzzed and went out. Total darkness swallowed. For a moment, the only sound was the hissing of the leak and the frantic beating of their own hearts. Then Vance fumbled for the chemical glow sticks in the survival kit. She cracked one. A sickly green phosphorescent light illuminated the sphere. It cast long, dancing shadows against the curved walls. In the green light, Thorn looked like a corpse. His skin was gray, his lips blue from the cold. He was shivering violently, the hypothermia setting in. We lost life support, Vance said, her voice calm with the acceptance of their reality. The scrubbers are off. We are breathing residual air. We have maybe 30 minutes before CO2 levels become toxic. It doesn't matter, Thorn stuttered, his teeth chattering. Look at the window. In the green glow of the chem light, the damage to the viewport was terrifyingly clear. The crack wasn't just a line anymore, it was a spiderweb. And the center of the window was bowing inward. The plastic was deforming, bulging towards them like a bubble about to burst. It's delaminating, Thorn said. The layers are separating. The glue is failing. 2,000 meters, Vance said, ignoring him, focusing on the needle. Come on, baby. Fly. She pushed the ascent lever past the safety stops, dumping the remaining compressed air into the buoyancy tanks to speed their rise. The submarine shuddered, vibrating violently. The turbulence was dangerous, but speed was life. At 1,500 meters, the nature of the leak changed. The hiss became a roar. A jet of water, thick as a pencil, punched through the center of the crack. It hit the back wall of the sphere with enough force to strip the paint off the metal. The noise was deafening. The water level rose to their calves. We're flooding, Thorn yelled, backing away from the window, as the spray hit his face. Don't let go of the patch, Vance screamed. It's useless. Thorn yelled back. He grabbed the emergency manual pump handle and started pumping, trying to fight the incoming tide. It was a losing battle. The ocean was coming in faster than 2 humans could pump it out. As they crossed the 1,000-meter mark, the edge of the midnight zone, a new variable entered the equation. Vance felt it before she saw it. A heavy rhythmic thudding against the hull. It wasn't the metallic knock of the Octopus. It was softer, duller. Bump, bump. Did you hear that? Vance, freezing. Is it the creature? Thorn asked, looking around the dark sphere in panic. Did it follow us? No, Vance said. We're too shallow for a Hadal species. It would die of depressurization. This is something else. She put her ear against the titanium wall. The sound came again. It sounded like bodies hitting the sub. Sharks, Vance realized. We're in the pelagic zone now. We're trailing a cloud of hydraulic fluid and electrical discharge. We're vibrating like a wounded fish. The sharks are investigating. It was a grim irony. They had escaped the monster of the deep, only to run the gauntlet of the surface predators. But the sharks couldn't hurt the titanium. The real danger was still the plastic window, 500 meters. The pressure was now only 50 atmospheres, survivable for the hull, but critical for the damaged acrylic. The bulging in the window had become a pronounced bubble. The water spraying in was blinding them. The cabin was a washing machine of freezing water, floating debris, and flashing sparks. "Brace for surface," Vance yelled. "We're coming up too fast. We're going to breach." Usually a submarine slows down before surfacing to avoid a collision or decompression damage, but Vance kept the throttle wide open. They were going to break the surface like a missile. 100 meters, 50, 10, boom. The Triton-X erupted from the surface of the Pacific Ocean. It shot 10 feet into the air, water cascading off its spherical hull, before crashing back down with a bone-jarring impact. They had made it. They were on the surface, but the celebration lasted exactly 3 seconds. The impact of the landing was the final straw for the viewport. The structural shockwave traveled through the titanium frame and hit the compromised acrylic. The window didn't explode inward. The internal pressure was now equalizing, but it failed catastrophically. The inner pane shattered. The ocean, which was no longer pressurized, but still heavy and relentless, poured in. It wasn't a spray anymore. It was a waterfall. "We're breached," Vance screamed, unbuckling her harness. "Get to the hatch. Blow the bolts." The submarine, heavy with the water it had already taken on, didn't bob high in the waves. It wallowed. It sat low, and with the window gone, the waves began to wash directly into the cockpit. The sphere began to tilt forward, nose heavy. They weren't floating. They were sinking. Thorne scrambled up the ladder to the upper hatch. He grabbed the manual release wheel. It stuck. He screamed. "The pressure differential. I can't turn." Even though they were on the surface, the vacuum created by the cooling air inside the sub was holding the hatch down. They were sealed in a sinking tomb. "The equalizer valve," Vance shouted, wading through waist-deep water to reach the panel. "Open the equalizer." She found the valve and twisted it. A hiss of air rushed into the cabin, equalizing the pressure. "Turn it now." Thorne threw his weight against the wheel. It groaned, then turned. 1 rotation, 2. The locking bolts retracted. He pushed the heavy titanium hatch up. Sunlight blinding. Brilliant, beautiful sunlight flooded into the dark sphere. The smell of fresh, salty air replaced the stench of ozone and fear. But the ocean was right behind them. The Triton-X was nose down at a 45-degree angle. The viewport was fully submerged, gulping down the Pacific Ocean by the gallon. The water was at Vance's chest. "Out. Out." Vance shoved Thorne upward. Thorne scrambled through the hatch, rolling out onto the small upper deck of the submarine. Vance followed him, clawing her way up the ladder. As the water rose to her neck, she grabbed the rim of the hatch and pulled herself up. Gasping for air, they collapsed on the small, non-slip surface of the submarine's roof. They were alive. They were out. But the Triton-X was dying. With the window gone, the sphere lost its buoyancy instantly. The submarine groaned, a sound like a dying whale, and began to slip beneath the waves. "Jump!" Vance yelled. They dove into the water, swimming frantically away from the sinking vessel to avoid the suction. They treaded water, bobbing in the swells, watching the end of their ship. The white sphere of the Triton-X, the billion-dollar marvel of engineering, pointed its nose vertical. For a moment, it bobbed there like a fishing float. Then, with a final gurgle of escaping air, it slipped silently beneath the surface. It began the long final fall back to the dock, back to the bottom, back to the creature. Vance and Thorne were left alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No boat, no radio, no land in sight, just 2 heads bobbing in the vast, indifferent blue. "The beacon," Thorne gasped, spitting salt water. "Did the emergency beacon activate?" "It's automatic," Vance said, wiping hair from her eyes. "If the sub sinks, the buoy deploys." They scanned the water. 100 yards away, a small bright orange object popped to the surface. It began to flash, a high-intensity strobe light. The PRIMAL emergency position indicating radio beacon. It was transmitting a distress signal to the satellite network. Help would come, but it would take time. Thorn looked down into the deep blue water beneath his feet. He pulled his legs up. A primal instinct. Overriding his scientific mind, he knew the monster was 11 kilometers down. Trapped by the pressure, he knew it couldn't come up, but the image of that golden eye, the intelligence behind it, and the sound of the rock hitting the glass, would never leave him. It let us go, Thorn whispered. Treading water. What? Vance asked, scanning the horizon for a ship at the bottom. Thorn said, when we shocked it, it let go, but then it chased us. It hit us one last time. It didn't want to stop us from leaving. Elena, it wanted to make sure we never came back. It was a warning. Well, Vance said, looking at the empty patch of ocean where her ship had vanished. Message received. They drifted. The silence of the Pacific. The sun beat down on their faces. Below them, miles down in the crushing dark, the Giganteus was likely reclaiming its territory, wrapping its tentacles around the sinking wreckage of the Triton-X, adding another trophy to its collection. The trap hadn't failed. It had just reset. The rescue of Commander Elena Vance and Dr. Aris Thorn did not look like a triumph. It looked like a quarantine operation. 3 hours after the Triton-X slipped beneath the waves, a Sikorsky Seahawk helicopter from a nearby U.S. Navy carrier group spotted the emergency beacon. But when the swimmers dropped into the water, they didn't just hoist the survivors into a basket. They treated them with a strange, clinical caution. They were scanned for radiation. They were checked for biological contaminants. And when they were finally winched up to the hovering aircraft, they weren't flown to a hospital. They were flown to the USS Ronald Reagan, an aircraft carrier patrolling the Philippine Sea, and placed immediately into isolation for the next 48 hours. Vance and Thorn existed in a surreal limbo. They were safe, warm and fed, but they were prisoners. They sat in a sterile, white-walled debriefing room, separated by a glass partition. They were interrogated not by marine biologists or rescue coordinators, but by men in gray suits, who didn't introduce themselves. These men didn't ask about the structural failure of the window. They didn't ask about the hypothermia. They asked about the anomaly. Describe the contact. The lead interrogator repeated for the 100th time. Did it display aggression? Or did it display curiosity? Did it use Thorn, exhausted and traumatized, pushed a piece of paper across the table. It was a sketch he had drawn from memory. The massive, translucent mantle, the hooked tentacles, the golden eyes devoid of pupils. It wasn't an animal, Thorn whispered, his voice raspy. It was an engineer. It dismantled us. It tested the hull. It found the weakness. The interrogator looked at the sketch, his expression unreadable. He slid a file folder across the table. Inside was a grainy sonar image, taken by a nuclear attack submarine, the USS Mississippi, which had been tracking the Triton-X's descent from a distance. The image showed the bottom of the trench. It showed the debris field of the Chinese land, and hovering above it, a heat signature that shouldn't exist, a massive, cold-blooded shadow that was generating a localized thermal bloom, evidence of a biological process so efficient it defied thermodynamics. We call it the Hadal Signal, the agent said. We've been hearing it for months. Low-frequency clicks, mimicry. We thought it was Russian stealth tech. We thought they were planting drones. It's not a drone, Vance said from the other side of the glass. It's a squid, or an octopus, something ancient. We recovered your black box data, the agent interrupted. The boy uploaded the telemetry before the sub sank. We have the audio logs. He pressed a button on a console. The room filled with the sound of the deep ocean, the static, the groan of the hull, and then the sound that stopped Thorn's heart. Where clunk, the mimicry. That sound, the agent said. That is the specific frequency of a General Electric pump used on the Triton class. The creature recorded it and played it back to you. But look at the waveform. He pointed to a spectral analyzer on the screen. There are subharmonics hidden in the noise, mathematical patterns, prime numbers. Thorn stared at the screen. The realization hit him like the pressure of the deep. It wasn't just copying us, it was testing us. It was seeing if we could recognize the pattern. It was an intelligence test. And we failed. Vance said softly. We tried to shock it. We attacked it. The cover-up began immediately. The sinking of the Triton-X was officially classified as a catastrophic structural failure due to manufacturing defects in the acrylic viewport. The press release mourned the loss of the vessel, but celebrated the survival of the crew. There was no mention of the creature, no mention of the lights being smashed, or the robotic arm being ripped off. The area of the Challenger Deep was designated a naval exclusion zone for environmental recovery, effectively sealing it off from future civilian expeditions. Vance and Thorne were released with strict non-disclosure agreement. They were told that speaking about the biological anomaly would be considered a breach of national security. They were grounded. Their careers in deep-sea exploration were over, but secrets like bodies in the ocean have a way of floating to the surface. 6 months later, Thorne received a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a hard drive. It contained a single video file, a backup recording from the Triton-X's internal camera, likely leaked by a sympathetic technician on the carrier. Thorne sat in his dark apartment, the glow of the monitor illuminating his face. He pressed play. The video showed the interior of the sphere during the final moments on the bottom. The red emergency lights bathed the scene in blood-colored hue. He saw himself and Vance struggling with the controls, and then he saw the window. In the recording, the camera angle was slightly different from his own line of sight during the dive. It looked up at the viewport. The creature was there, pressing its massive golden eye against the glass. But the video revealed something Thorne had missed in the panic. As the creature held the rock, preparing to strike, its skin wasn't just flashing red and white. It was displaying complex geometric patterns, spirals, grids, flashing sequences that rippled down its tentacles. It was a language, a visual communication of staggering complexity. And then, just before the creature struck the glass, it did something else. It dropped the rock for a second and pointed. It used the tip of a tentacle to point at the pressure gauge inside the sub. Then it pointed up. It was warning us. Thorne whispered to the empty room. It wasn't trying to kill us. It was telling us the pressure was too high. It was trying to break the glass to equalize. No. He rewound the video. He watched it frame by frame. The creature hits the glass. The crack appears. The creature pulses blue, a calming color in nature. It wraps around the sub. It wasn't attacking. Thorne realized the horror of the misunderstanding washing over him. It was hugging us. It was trying to reinforce the hull. It sensed the metal groaning. It sensed the stress. It was trying to hold the ship together.
The rock, the smashing of the lights, the dismantling of the loud, noisy sensors. The creature wasn't a monster. It was a gardener. It was removing the noisy, bright, vibrating intruders that were disturbing its silence. And when the intruders didn't leave, it tried to interact. It tried to communicate. And when the humans responded with a massive electric shock, it lashed out in pain. The attack during the ascent, the final blow that shattered the window, wasn't a pursuit. It was a spasm, a reaction to the electrical burn. Humanity had gone to the deepest place on Earth, encountered a superior intelligence, and immediately tried to electrocute it. We had treated a diplomat like a monster. Thorne closed the laptop. He walked to his window and looked out at the city lights. He thought about the creature down there in the eternal dark, nursing its burns, holding the wreckage of the Triton-X. It had the submarine. It had the computers. It had the technology. It would take it apart. It would study it. It would learn. The next time humans went down there, the Giganteus wouldn't be curious. It wouldn't be friendly. It would be prepared. The trap hadn't been set by the monster. The trap was our own ignorance. We projected our fear onto the unknown, and in doing so, we created an enemy where there might have been a god. The Triton-X sits in the silt today, 11 kilometers down. It is a monument to human hubris, and inside the wreckage, in the crushed titanium sphere, the creature is likely still there, running its tentacles over the controls, decoding our secrets, waiting for the lights to return. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, yet we know less about its floor than we do about the surface of Mars. We send rockets into the void of space, searching for intelligent life, scanning the stars for a signal, while beneath our own waves, in the crushing pressure of the Hadal zones, an intelligence may have been watching us for millions of years. The story of the Triton-X serves as a grim reminder of the dark forest theory. Maybe the universe isn't silent because there's no one out there. Maybe it's silent because the smart ones know to stay quiet. Maybe the creatures of the deep have remained hidden not because they are primitive, but because they know that contact with the surface brings only noise, pain, and destruction. Recent discoveries in the Mariana Trench, giant viruses, bacteria that consume metal, and now the rumors of the Giganteus, suggest that the deep ocean is not a biological desert. It is a separate biosphere, an alien world right here on Earth, and the dominant species of that world is not us. We are the intruders. We are the noisy neighbors, dropping probes and generating sonar pings that deafen the residents of the dark. The encounter at Challenger Deep was a test, a first contact scenario that ended in violence. Because of our fear, the files remain classified. The official story remains a structural failure, but the data is out there. The oceanographic community whispers about the Hadal Signal. Submarines operating in the Pacific report strange acoustic shadows following them. Cables laid on the ocean floor are being cut, not by rock slides but by something that understands tension and leverage. The Giganteus is learning. It knows we are here. It knows we are hostile, and it has all the time in the world. So the next time you look at the ocean, don't just see a flat expanse of blue. Imagine the layers, the sunlit zone, where we play, the twilight zone, where the light fades, and the midnight zone, the kingdom of the pressure and the dark. Remember that we are just tourists on the surface tension of a very deep, very old drop of water, and down at the bottom, something is looking up, waiting for us to make the mistake of knocking on the door again. This brings our deep dive into the Mariana Trench mystery to a close. But now I want to hear your verdict on the Hadal Phantom. Do you believe the creature was actually hostile, a monster trying to open a can of food? Or do you agree with Thorne's final theory, that it was a misunderstood intelligence trying to communicate or even help, and we attacked it out of fear? Was the mimicry a threat or a greeting? Let me know your theory in the comments below. I read every single one, and the best theories might be featured in a future community post. If this story of deep-sea isolation, claustrophobia, and the unknown kept you holding your breath, you have found your home. Primal Fear is dedicated to exploring the terrifying boundary between nature and humanity. But to survive what comes next, you need to be prepared. Make sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell turned on, because next week we are leaving the pressure of the deep for the freezing winds of the surface. We are traveling to the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union, to the winter of 1959. We are going to investigate a pack of wolves that defied every law of nature. They didn't fear fire, they didn't fear bullets, and they hunted a team of geologists, not for food, but to protect a secret hidden in the snow. The ghost pack of the Urals is next. Until then, fear the deep, and be careful what you listen for in the dark.